She stood beside him through 3 wars, 2 famines, and 1 plague that nearly broke the pack to its bones. She bled for his borders. She negotiated peace with alphas who wanted his head. She buried their stillborn daughter alone because he was out riding with a woman who smelled like wildflowers and betrayal. And tonight, in front of every wolf who ever bowed to her title, Ryker Vale looked Selene Ashford in the eyes and chose someone else's son. This is her story. Not the one they'll tell around council fires. The real one. Drop your city in the comments and stay with me, because what happens next will break you. The torches along the Moonfire Circle had been burning since sundown. There were hundreds of them, iron-staked and pitch-soaked, driven into the earth in a ring that stretched 60 yards across the ceremonial flat below Silverfang's northern ridge. Every torch was lit by hand. That was tradition. Selene had overseen the lighting herself, moving through the line of pack members with a flame rod, and a word for each family, the way she had done every year for the past 9 years. She remembered the first time Ryker had watched her do it. He had been leaning against the ridge post with his arms crossed, and that slow half-smile on his face. And when she'd finished the last torch and turned back to find him still watching, he'd said, "You make them feel like it matters." She had told him it did matter. He'd pulled her against him and kissed her temple and called her the only woman alive who could make a fire ceremony feel like home. Tonight the torches were lit, and Ryker was not watching her. He was standing at the far end of the platform beside the stone throne dais, speaking in a low voice to his beta, Colt Harwick. 2 of his senior enforcers flanked them, faces unreadable in the firelight. Selene stood at the platform's edge where she had been placed, front and center, visible to the entire assembly, wearing the silver and obsidian Luna crest at her throat and a ceremonial gown the color of smoke. She had dressed for this. She had prepared remarks for this. She had believed, in the deep and stupid way that only loyalty can produce, that tonight was going to be an announcement of Silverfang's strength, the way Ryker had described it to her 3 weeks ago. "Pack morale is low after the border war," he had said. "We need the Moonfire ceremony to feel significant this year. I want it to feel like a new chapter." She had agreed. She had helped plan it. She had ordered the extra torches, the full pack assembly, the formal seating for the Outer Territory families who rarely made the trek to the Capital Ridge. She had written to 4 allied packs and invited their representatives to witness. She had done all of it because she trusted that a new chapter meant the 2 of them standing together before their people, announcing stability, succession, the future they had bled to build. She looked at the crowd now. 800 wolves, maybe more, seated on the terraced stone banks that descended from the ridge like ancient steps, dressed in formal pack colors, faces upturned toward the platform, with the particular anticipation that the Moonfire ceremony always carried. Children sat cross-legged in the front rows. Elders occupied the carved stone benches on the highest tier. The allied representatives were visible near the eastern edge. 3 Ironcrest wolves in gray leathers, a delegation from the Ashvale border clan, and 2 stone-faced observers from the Eastern Ridge packs whose names Selene still didn't know. She had not seen Vanessa yet. That was the thing her mind kept returning to, circling it the way a wolf circles a wound it cannot stop touching. She had not seen Vanessa Dre anywhere in the platform staging area when the pack assembled. She had looked. She had looked the way a woman looks when she already knows something is wrong, but has decided to believe she's imagining it. Vanessa was Ryker's mistress. Everyone knew it, in the half-spoken, eyes-down way that pack wolves learn to know things they weren't meant to acknowledge. She had been in Silverfang territory for 2 years. She was not pack-born. She had arrived through a back channel that Selene had never been given a clean explanation for, and she had remained through a combination of Ryker's protection and Selene's own grinding refusal to let herself be seen as threatened. Selene had survived 3 wars. She was not going to fall apart over a woman with wildflower perfume. That was what she had told herself. For 2 years she had told herself that. Ryker moved to the center of the platform. The drums went quiet. That was the signal. The head drummer pulled back his mallets and the crowd shifted, 800 bodies settling into attention, and the only sound left was the crack and breath of the torches. Ryker Vale was 41 years old, and he still moved the way he had at 25, with the wide, grounded authority of a man who had never once questioned whether a room belonged to him. He was broad through the chest, dark-haired, with a jaw that looked cut from the same granite as Silverfang's northern ridge. There was a scar that ran from his left ear to his collarbone, a rogue blade from the First Border War, and Selene had traced that scar with her fingers so many times she could have drawn it in her sleep. She watched him move to the center and felt the old reflex stir in her chest. The pride, the partnership, the long-boned certainty of this man is mine and I am his. She felt it, and then, almost in the same breath, she felt it hollow. "Silverfang," Ryker said, his voice carried without effort. It always had. 9 years ago I stood on this platform and made a vow to this pack. I said I would lead you through whatever the world threw at our borders. I said I would make Silverfang strong enough to outlast any storm." He paused. The firelight moved across his face. "I meant every word." Selene heard a small sound at the edge of the platform. She turned her head a fraction and saw them. Vanessa came through the rear entrance of the platform stage with the unhurried ease of a woman who had been told exactly when to arrive. She was wearing deep red, not ceremonial colors, not pack tradition, just a dress that sat against her skin like a decision. Her dark hair was loose. She was beautiful in the way of someone who had spent considerable effort making beauty look effortless. She was also holding a child's hand. The boy was perhaps 3 years old, dark-haired like Ryker, wide, serious eyes that moved across the crowd without blinking. He was dressed in formal Silverfang gray. He was wearing a small silver crest at his collar. Selene's body went cold. Not the cold of surprise. She had been cold for 2 years underneath everything, the slow cold of knowing something and refusing to let it become real. This was a different cold. This was the cold of the moment before impact, when the world narrows to a single point and your body understands what your mind is still trying to argue against. Ryker turned to face the rear of the platform. "Come," he said. Vanessa walked forward. She moved with the ease of someone who had rehearsed this, or perhaps someone who had never needed to rehearse anything because her whole life had been building toward a single moment of arrival. She stopped 2 feet to Ryker's left, which put her directly across the platform from Selene, and she looked at Selene with an expression that was not gloating. It was worse than gloating. It was satisfaction. The quiet, settled satisfaction of someone who had won a long game and was watching the other player finally understand the score. The boy stood between them. He was looking up at Ryker with complete trust. Ryker looked out at the crowd. "This is Marcus," he said. "My son." The silence lasted 3 full seconds. Selene counted them. She was aware of her own breathing, slow, deliberate, each inhale a controlled decision, and she was aware of 800 wolves going very, very still, in the way wolves go still when they sense something fundamental has just shifted. Then the murmur started, low and spreading, moving through the terrace seats like a wave finding its level. Ryker waited it out. He always waited out the noise. It was one of the things she had admired about him. "Silverfang has needed clarity about its future," he said when the murmur ebbed. "We have fought wars. We have survived losses. We have earned our place on this ridge through blood and sacrifice and the kind of loyalty that doesn't break under pressure." He reached down and lifted the boy, lifted Marcus, and held him at chest height, and turned so the firelight fell full on both their faces. "I am naming Marcus Drayvale as my heir and the future Alpha of Silverfang. This is the new chapter I promised you." Selene did not move. She was standing 6 feet from Ryker, and she did not move. She felt the Luna crest at her throat as if it had suddenly become an object with weight, with pressure, something that was pressing against her windpipe and asking her a question she already knew the answer to. Around her, the assembly had broken fully into noise now. Not celebration, not the roar that a proper succession announcement would have earned, but something more fractured and uncertain, voices cutting across each other. She could pick out specific threads of it. The Luna. What about the Luna? Does this mean, who is the mother? Selene. Ryker's voice. Quiet now, just for her. She turned and looked at him. He had set the boy down and the boy had moved to Vanessa's side, one small hand gripping the red fabric of her dress. Ryker was looking at Selene with an expression she recognized and had spent 2 years pretending to misread. It was the expression of a man who has decided something and is waiting for the formality of saying it out loud. "I should have said this to you before tonight," he said. "Yes," she said, "you should have." Something crossed his face. Not shame, not quite. More like the brief, irritable acknowledgement of a man who knows he handled something poorly, but is not prepared to let that knowledge slow him down. "You've been a strong Luna," he said. "You've served this pack well." Served. Past tense. "Ryker." Her voice came out level. She was proud of that. She was prouder of that than she had been of almost anything in 2 years. "What are you doing?" "What needs doing," he said. "Silverfang needs a clear bloodline succession. I have a son. Marcus is—" "He is 3 years old," Selene said. "He has no pack blood. His mother is not pack-born. She carries no territorial bond. She has never—" "He carries mine," Ryker said. The words fell flat and final. Selene looked at him the way she had looked at enemy alphas across conference tables in the aftermath of wars. Looked at him with the particular clarity that comes when you have nothing left to protect, and therefore nothing left to lose. She saw him clearly. The jaw, the scar, the absolute certainty that ran through him like bedrock. And she saw, underneath all of it, the thing she had been refusing to see for 2 years. He had made his decision. He had made it long before tonight. "And me?" she said. "What am I then?" Ryker was quiet for a beat too long. "You were never strong enough to give me a true heir," he said. "You know that. The healers told you after the loss. It was never going to happen." She heard a sound. It took her a moment to understand that the sound was coming from the crowd. A collective sharp intake of breath, 800 wolves who had just watched their alpha say that to the woman who had buried his child in the northern ground and then stood back up and kept walking because the pack needed her to. The allied observers were motionless. Colt Harwick, standing at the platform's edge, had his eyes on the stone below his boots. Even Vanessa's expression had shifted slightly. Not to sympathy, never that, but to the faint, hungry alertness of someone watching a predator move in. Selene's hands were still at her sides. She had a choice. She understood this with complete clarity. She could answer him. She had the words. She had been carrying them for 2 years, the arguments, the evidence, the documented history of what she had done for Silverfang and what he had dismantled behind her back. She could say them here, in front of 800 witnesses, in front of the allied observers and the council elders and the children in the front rows who were watching with wide and frightened eyes. She could tell all of them what a Luna does with her hands when her pack is burning. Instead, she raised one hand to her throat. The Luna crest was silver, set with an obsidian center stone, old worked metal with the Silverfang wolf etched into the face. She had worn it for 9 years. She had worn it through the first border war when she negotiated a ceasefire that Ryker's own beta had called impossible. She had worn it through the famine winter when she had ridden the northern supply lines herself because no one else knew the route. She had worn it through the healer's room, through the loss, through the long, silent months after, when Ryker had stopped coming to their chambers, and she had understood that grief, for some men, comes out looking exactly like cruelty. She had worn it the day she buried their daughter. She unclasped it. The chain was fine silver and it came away from her neck with almost no weight. She held it in her closed fist for a moment. One moment, just one. And then she set it down on the edge of the throne dais with the small, precise sound of metal on stone. She did not throw it. She did not drop it. She placed it. That distinction mattered to her more than she could have explained, and she thought she would carry it with her for years. The specific choice of placing rather than throwing, the way a woman places down something that was always hers and is choosing to walk away from anyway. She turned from the platform. "Selene," Ryker's voice sharper now, she kept walking. "Luna Ashford." One of the council elders, old Fenwick, gray-muzzled and sharp-eyed, standing from his carved bench on the upper tier. His voice carried the register of a man who had lived through 4 alpha successions and was watching something he had never seen before. Several others were rising to their feet around him. Selene walked down the platform steps. The crowd nearest to the base parted for her, not in deference. That was gone. She understood it was gone. but in something else, something that felt almost like instinct. The way wolves clear a path for something moving with purpose and pain and the kind of quiet that precedes catastrophe. She kept her spine straight. Her hands were at her sides, and she kept them there. She did not run. Running was for people who had something left to lose in this place. She crossed the edge of the moonfire circle. The torches burned on all sides, and she walked between them without looking up. And she did not cry, would not cry, not here, not in front of this pack, not in front of the allied observers who would carry word of tonight back to every territory within 300 miles. She had been many things to Silverfang, and she would not be remembered as the woman who wept when she left. Behind her, she heard Ryker resume speaking. His voice came across the flat and through the torch smoke, and she caught fragments of it. Stability, succession, the future of this pack, and each word landed on her back like something she had already learned to carry. She had always been able to carry things. That had never been the question. She passed the last torch. The dark beyond the moonfire circle was absolute. Silverfang's northern territory fell away from the ceremonial flat in a long, rocky descent. And at the bottom of that descent there was a tree line that began the edge of the true wilderness, uncharted ground that even pack wolves rarely entered after dark. Selene stood at the edge where the torchlight ended and looked down at the dark and felt the cold moving up from it like breath. 9 years. She had come to Silverfang at 26, after her own pack in the Eastern Territories dissolved in a council war that left nothing behind but ash and bad debts. She had arrived with a horse, a travel pack, and the specific competence of someone who has had everything taken from them once and made a private decision about what that meant for the rest of their life. Ryker had taken one look at her across the council table and said, "What exactly do you want here?" And she had told him the truth. "I want to build something that lasts." He had hired her as an advisor before the end of the week. Luna within 18 months, his equal in everything but the biological fact of the Alpha title within 3 years. She had believed she was building something. She started walking down the slope. The rock was loose under her feet, and the ceremonial gown was wrong for this kind of ground, too long, already catching on the scrub brush that grew between the stones. She did not care about the gown. She gathered the hem in one hand and kept her footing and went down into the dark, and behind her the torches of the moonfire ceremony were already shrinking, 800 wolves and a throne dais and the small silver crest she had set down on stone, all of it getting smaller, all of it becoming the past. She was 100 yards into the tree line when she stopped. She leaned her back against a pine trunk and put both hands against her stomach and breathed. The cold was serious out here, late autumn in the northern territories, the kind of cold that came with weight, that pressed on your chest and made every breath require an act of will. She breathed through it. In through the nose, out slow, the way the pack's combat trainer had taught her 15 years ago when she was a girl, learning what her body could withstand. "You don't panic until you've run out of options," the trainer had said. "And you don't run out of options until you're dead." She was not dead. She pressed her back against the pine and breathed and felt, underneath the cold and the grief and the raw, specific humiliation of being dismissed in front of 800 witnesses, something else. Something small and persistent and animal. The part of her that had rebuilt from nothing before and knew, not hoped, knew, that it could do so again. The part that had watched Ryker's face as he said she was never strong enough and had registered, behind the pain, the truth, that he was wrong, that he had been wrong about her for a long time, that the wrongness was his failure of intelligence, not hers of worth. She was not going to die in the northern wilderness over a man's pride. She was going to survive this the way she survived everything, quietly, methodically, and with her eyes open. She pushed off the tree and began walking north. She had no clear plan, not yet. She had the gown and the boots underneath it, and she had her hands and her training and the territorial knowledge of 9 years ranging Silverfang's northern ground. She had somewhere between 2 and 6 hours before anyone thought to follow. Ryker would spend the rest of the ceremony managing the fallout, and whatever loyal pack members might have wanted to come after her would be watching each other, waiting to see which way the wind moved before they committed to anything. That was pack politics. That was something she knew better than almost anyone. She had time. She moved through the trees, letting her eyes adjust. letting her body remember the particular way of moving through dark ground that was instinct more than training. The wind was coming from the north-northwest, cold enough to make her eyes water. The ceremonial gown was becoming a real problem. She stopped twice to tear away the heaviest portions of the outer skirt, leaving the underlayer that was thin but wouldn't catch on branches, and each tear of the fabric felt less like desperation and more like a decision, like stripping down to something essential. She thought about the boy, Marcus, 3 years old with Ryker's dark hair and someone else's eyes. She was not angry at the child. The child had not chosen this. The child was a piece moved on a board by adults, and she felt for him the same bleak understanding she had felt for every pawn she'd ever watched get sacrificed. You deserved better than the people who made you part of their game. She thought about Vanessa's face, the satisfaction in it. She thought about the expression Colt Harwick had been unable to hold, his eyes going to the stone rather than meet hers. And she wondered how long he had known, whether any of Ryker's inner circle had known and said nothing to her, whether the warning signs she had told herself she was imagining had in fact been warnings, clear and real, and she had chosen not to see them because she needed to believe in the thing she was building. The tree line broke. She came out onto a high, flat shelf of rock, maybe 40 feet across, that jutted from the hillside like a natural platform. Below it, the valley floor was dark. Above, the sky was open and moonlit. Full moon, the Moonfire moon, the one the ceremony was named for, and it hung enormous and white over the northern ridge and lit the rock shelf like daylight. Selene stood on the edge of it and looked out at the valley and breathed the cold air and felt the strange, fractured peace of someone who has just had everything they were afraid of lose finally happen. The fear was gone. That was the thing she had not expected. For 2 years she had been living inside the anticipatory grief of something she could see coming and could not stop. And now that it had arrived, now that the worst of it had been spoken out loud in front of 800 witnesses and 3 allied delegations, the fear was simply gone. What was left was clarity, cold and clean and vast as the valley below her. She needed to get to the Morrow supply outpost. It was 14 miles north, a way station she had established herself in the 2nd year of her tenure as Luna, for exactly the kind of emergency provisioning she needed right now. No one would expect her to know where it was. It had never been formally documented on pack maps, only in her own logbooks, which were currently sitting in her council chamber in a locked drawer. The council chamber Ryker's people would search within the hour. She needed to move faster. She turned from the valley and found her footing on the far edge of the rock shelf and began the descent toward the valley floor. And she was 3 steps down when she heard it, a sound from below the shelf, something too deliberate to be wind, too heavy for small game. She went still. Boots on stone. More than one person. She pressed herself flat against the rock face, all that combat training from 20 years ago snapping back into her body with the specific urgency of something that had never actually left. And she looked down the slope and saw the movement below. 2 shapes, maybe 3, moving up through the dark in a line. Too organized to be random wolves, too quiet for pack trackers who made noise intentionally as a show of authority. These were not Silverfang wolves. The lead figure reached the base of the rock shelf and looked up, and the moonlight found his face. He was perhaps 35, dark-complexioned, with close-cropped hair and the particular quality of stillness that she associated with soldiers who had seen enough violence to no longer need to perform readiness. He wore no colors she recognized. Around his neck, visible even in the moonlight, was a simple black cord with a small carved token she had seen in intelligence reports. A shadow mark. The territorial insignia of the Shadowclaw pack. He looked up at her without surprise. "Luna Ashford," he said. His voice was quiet and direct, carrying no ceremony. "My Alpha sent me." Selene's hands tightened against the rock. "Your Alpha," she said, "doesn't know me." "He knows of you," the man said. "He's known of you for 2 years. He said to tell you—" A pause, and in the pause something shifted in his expression, something that wasn't quite sympathy, but wasn't indifferent either. "That the northern outpost at Morrow Station was burned 3 days ago. Vanessa Dre's orders. There's nothing left of it." The cold moved through her then, different from before. Not the cold of grief,
the cold of a trap she hadn't seen closing. "She's been planning this," Selene said. "Not a question." "Longer than you know," the man said. "My Alpha wants to offer you shelter. Safe passage north, through Shadowclaw territory, no conditions." He looked at her steadily. "He wants you to hear what he knows before you make any decisions about what comes next." Selene looked at him for a long moment. Below the rock shelf, his two companions had come into view, both armed, both with the same quality of contained readiness, watching the slope and the tree line with professional attention. An offer of shelter from an Alpha she had never met, delivered through warriors who had been waiting in the dark below Silverfang's ceremonial grounds on the same night as the Moonfire ceremony. She thought about Morrow's station. Burned 3 days ago. Vanessa had known then. Not just tonight, she had been moving against Selene for weeks, removing the exits before the door was shut, which meant Ryker's announcement was not the beginning of Vanessa's plan. It was a milestone in something that had already been running for a long time.
And if Morrow's station was gone, and the council chamber logs were compromised, and every known exit from the northern territories had been mapped and blocked, Selene looked at the Shadowclaw warrior below her. Then she looked back, briefly, over her shoulder toward where the moonfire torches still burned in the distance, small and orange against the black of the ridge, and felt something move through her chest that was not love, and was not hatred, and was not grief exactly, but was something older and harder, the deep bone acknowledgement of a chapter closing. She looked back at the warrior. "What is your Alpha's name?" she said. "Kyle Draven," the man said. She had heard that name. Everyone in the Northern Territories had heard that name, in the same half-spoken, eyes-down way you heard names that carried real weight. Shadowclaw. The pack that had never lost a border conflict in 40 years. The Alpha, who had taken a failing territorial holding and rebuilt it into something 3 times its original size through a combination of strategy and the kind of ruthlessness that even enemy packs spoke of with something approaching respect. She had heard the name. She had never expected to need it. "What does Kyle Draven want with me?" she asked. The warrior looked at her, and for the first time something crossed his face that was close to direct emotion. Not sympathy, still not that, but something she recognized after years of reading the faces of soldiers who had seen their share of battles and betrayals. Honesty. "He said you'd ask that," the warrior said, "and he said to tell you the truth. He doesn't know yet. But he said whatever you're carrying—" His eyes dropped briefly, and when they came back up there was something deliberate in his steadiness, something that told her the look was not accidental. "He said you should not be carrying it alone. In the dark. In someone else's territory." The wind moved through the trees below the shelf. Selene's hand went before she could stop it to her stomach. She had known for 11 days, she had known and had told no one, not Ryker, not Colt, not the healer she had visited under a false name in the border town 2 weeks past. She had known, and she had been trying to find the right moment, had been trying to understand what it meant, had been standing on Silverfang's platform tonight believing with the particular and devastating faith of a woman who has not yet accepted the full shape of her situation, that the right moment might come. The warrior was still watching her, not the way men watched when they wanted something, the way soldiers watch when they've been given a mission and understand the weight of it. "How does your Alpha know?" she asked. The warrior said nothing, which was, she understood, an answer. She looked out at the dark valley below, at the 14 miles of burned and compromised northern ground between her and anything that had once been a plan. She looked at the moonfire torches, smaller now, barely visible above the tree line. She thought about what she had placed down on the dais stone and what she had not placed down. What was still hers, would always be hers, could not be stripped in a ceremony or announced away by a man who had built his future on the wrong foundation. She pressed her hand flat against her stomach for one breath, one private second, and then she took her hand away and straightened. "How far north is your Alpha's territory?" she said. 4 days' ride, the warrior said. "I'm on foot," she said. "I have no provisions and I'm wearing a destroyed ceremonial gown." "We brought a horse," he said, "and a pack." She looked at him. "Of course you did," she said. She started down from the shelf. She was halfway down when the sound came from behind her. from the direction of the moonfire circle, from somewhere in the trees between her and the ceremony, a specific sound she knew from years of border patrols, the crashing run of wolves moving through terrain with authority and urgency, not tracking quietly, not trying to be careful, moving fast and loud in the way of pack enforcers who had been given orders they intended to carry out immediately. The warrior below her had already turned, his hand on the blade at his hip. "How many?" she said. He listened for 2 seconds. 6, he said. "Maybe 8. Ryker's enforcers. Already. Faster than she had calculated, which meant someone had been watching the platform perimeter before the ceremony, had been positioned and waiting for exactly this, which meant Vanessa had not just planned for tonight. She had planned for after tonight, for every direction Selene might run. "Can you hold them?" Selene said. The warrior looked at her. "With 3 men against 8 Silverfang enforcers in their own territory. Can you hold them long enough?" A pause. Behind her, the crashing was getting closer, close enough now that she could hear individual footfalls separating from the massive sound, the specific rhythm of trained wolves who knew this ground. "Long enough for what?" the warrior said. And that was the question. Selene reached the bottom of the shelf and found her feet on solid ground, and the warrior was right there, his companions flanking, the horse standing calm and dark-coated a few yards back in the trees. She looked at the warrior, and he looked at her. And somewhere behind her in the Silverfang trees, 8 enforcers were closing the distance, and somewhere ahead of her was a Shadowclaw Alpha she had never met, who claimed to know something she had told no one. "Long enough for me to make a decision," she said. The first branch snapped in the trees above the shelf. They were out of time. Bomb! The horse moved north into the dark. Behind them, the moonfire torches of Silverfang still burned on the ridge. And inside the pack she had given 9 years to, something Selene had not yet learned was already in motion. A sealed letter, written in Vanessa's hand, dispatched 3 days ago to 3 rival alphas, each one containing the same 4 words. "The Luna is gone." And beneath that, an offer. The horse was fast. That was the first thing Selene registered. Not gratitude, not relief, just the clean mechanical fact of a good animal under her that knew how to move through dark terrain without hesitation. The Shadowclaw warrior, who had told her his name was Davin, rode slightly ahead and to her left, his 2 companions flanking in a loose triangle that she recognized as an extraction formation. They had done this before. They had drilled for this specifically, or something close enough to it that the movements were automatic. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit had gone quiet about a mile back. That bothered her more than the noise had. "They stopped," she said. Davin didn't turn his head. "I know. Pack enforcers don't stop unless they've been called back or they've handed off to someone else." "I know that too." She studied the back of his head for a moment. The way he held himself in the saddle, loose through the shoulders, weight-centered, hands light on the reins. A man who had been in enough situations to know that tension was a resource you spent carefully. "Which is it?" she said. "Called back," he said. "Most likely." "Why would Ryker call them back?" Davin was quiet for a beat. The trees moved past on both sides, pine and hardwood, the ground rising steadily as they pushed north toward the territory boundary. "Because Vanessa told him to," he said. The words landed with a particular weight, not because they were surprising. Selene had already built the shape of that logic in her head during the first half-mile of riding, but hearing it said out loud, plainly, by someone who had no investment in protecting her from the truth, was different. Vanessa had not needed Ryker's enforcers to catch Selene tonight. She had needed them to run far enough that everyone saw her run. "She wanted witnesses," Selene said. 800 of them, Davin said, plus 3 allied delegations. Selene looked at the dark between the trees and breathed through the specific feeling of having been played by someone she had underestimated. Not a comfortable feeling, not one she intended to carry long, but honest. And she had decided somewhere on that rock shelf that honesty was the only currency she could afford right now. "How long has your Alpha been watching Silverfang?" she said. "Long enough." "That's not an answer." Davin glanced back at her then. His face in the moonlight was difficult to read. Not closed exactly, but economical, a man who had learned to give nothing away that he didn't mean to give. My Alpha will answer your questions, he said. I'm here to get you to him in one piece. Those are different jobs. She let it go. He was right, and she was tired, and she had 4 days to decide how much she trusted the word of a man she had never met, spoken through intermediaries, in the dark, on the worst night of her recent life. She had made worse decisions under better conditions. She intended to make no decisions at all until she had slept and eaten and stopped feeling the specific weight of where the Lunacrest used to sit at her throat. She rode and let the miles happen. Somewhere around the second hour, one of the flanking warriors, younger, maybe 25, with a fresh scar across his chin, pulled up alongside her. He held out a strip of dried meat and a water skin without ceremony, the way you'd hand provisions to someone you'd been told to keep functional, not comfortable. She took both without comment and ate, while the horse moved and did not think about the fact that the last meal she'd eaten had been in her own council chambers in Silverfang's keep, at a table she had furnished herself, in a chair that had her shape worn into it after 9 years. She was not going to think about the chair. She thought about the letter. 3 rival alphas. The Luna is gone. An offer Vanessa had written 3 days before the ceremony, which meant Vanessa had known with enough certainty to move pieces 3 days early, which meant either Ryker had confirmed the timeline to her directly, or Vanessa had so thoroughly mapped the interior of Silverfang's power structure that she didn't need Ryker's confirmation anymore. Either way, Selene had underestimated the reach. That was the error. Not trusting Ryker. Not loving him. Love was never the mistake. Love was just weather. It happened to you and you moved through it. The error was underestimating Vanessa, treating her as a personal problem when she was in fact a strategic one, spending 2 years managing her own dignity around the situation instead of treating Vanessa the way she would have treated any external threat that had established a foothold inside her territory. She would not make that error again. The tree line broke before dawn. They came out onto a wide, shallow river crossing, stones flat and pale in the early gray, water no more than knee-deep on the horses. And on the far bank, the territory markers changed. She could feel it, the way any wolf with ranging experience could feel the shift in territorial claim, the specific pressure of a different pack's mark on the air and ground. Shadow Claw. She had never been in this territory before. It felt older than Silverfang's lands, more settled, the kind of claim that had been held and defended across generations until it stopped feeling like territory and started feeling like bedrock. They crossed the river. On the far bank, Davin pulled up and looked at her. "We'll stop here for 2 hours," he said. "Horses need water, and you need—" a pause, brief and unadorned. "Rest." "I'm fine," she said. "My Alpha said you'd say that," he said. "He also said that traveling 4 days on no sleep with—" He stopped himself. She looked at him steadily. "With what?" Davin met her eyes and said nothing, and that silence was its own kind of answer, the kind she had been carrying alone for 11 days and had apparently not carried as invisibly as she'd believed. "Your Alpha," she said, keeping her voice flat, "knows a great deal about my situation for a man I've never met." "He's been thorough," Davin said, which was not a comfort, not quite. But it wasn't a threat either, and Selene had spent enough years reading the difference to know which was which. She dismounted. They made camp in a hollow below a limestone outcrop. No fire, no light. The kind of camp that was designed to leave no trace. Selene sat with her back against the stone and pulled the remaining portions of her torn ceremonial gown tight against the cold and did not sleep. She thought. Thinking was what she had instead of sleep on nights like this, and she had learned to make it productive rather than circular. Vanessa's letters to 3 rival alphas, whatever offer was in them. The Moonfire ceremony as theater, not a decision, a performance of a decision that had already been made months earlier. Morrow Station, burned 3 days ago. The exits closed before the door. Cale Draven, who had been watching, who had sent warriors to the Silverfang ceremonial grounds on exactly this night. Who knew things about her he should not have known? She was walking into something. She understood that. The question was whether she was walking into it because it was her only option, or because it was the right option, and she was honest enough with herself to admit she could not yet tell the difference. Survival had a way of narrowing the moral geometry until you were grateful for any door that opened, regardless of what was on the other side. She touched her stomach once, briefly, in the dark. Then she stopped. Then she started planning. They reached Shadowclaw's central holding on the afternoon of the 4th day. It was not what she had expected. She had built a picture of it from intelligence reports and trader talk, a military installation, essentially, stripped of ceremony, the kind of place that a pack ran when it had been at war more often than at peace. She had expected stone walls and patrol lines and the particular blankness of a territory that had spent 40 years grinding itself into a weapon. What she found was a working settlement. There were walls, heavy timber and stone, serious construction. But inside them, there were houses, markets, children running between the buildings with the specific chaos of children who had not been taught to be afraid. The pack members who watched their arrival from doorways and market stalls watched with open curiosity rather than suspicion, which told her something about the culture Kyle Draven had built here, about the relationship between the Alpha and the wolves who lived under his claim. Silverfang's wolves had learned to watch strangers with wariness. These wolves watched with the steady, assessing confidence of people who trusted the walls around them. She filed that away. Davin led her through the central settlement to a long, low building set against the eastern wall. Not the main hall, not the Alpha's formal seat, which she could see rising on the ridge above them. A meeting house. Neutral ground. "He's waiting," Davin said. "In there," she said. "Yes." She looked at the building, then she looked at Davin. "You could have taken me to the hold directly." "He didn't want to," Davin said. "He said you'd want a room that wasn't his before you decided whether you'd set foot in one that was." She stood with that for a moment. Then she walked to the door and pushed it open. The room was plain. A table, 4 chairs, a fire that had been burning long enough to take the chill out of the air, but not so long that it felt staged. There was water on the table and bread, and something that smelled like a proper meal, and standing at the far end of the room with his back to the fire and his arms loose at his sides was a man she had only seen in second-hand descriptions. Kyle Draven was taller than she'd pictured. Late 30s, maybe 40, with the build of someone who had never stopped training, not the showpiece muscle of a man who wanted to look dangerous, but the functional, settled strength of one who had never needed to prove it in any room he walked into. He had a face that wasn't handsome exactly, but was striking in the way of faces that had been through something and come out the other side still holding their shape. Dark eyes, level and direct. He was watching her the way she had been watched by very few people in her life. Not with the cataloging look of someone sizing up a threat, not with the careful gentleness of someone managing a fragile person, but with the simple, undivided attention of a man who had been waiting to look at someone for a long time and intended to do it properly. She did not let herself react to that. "Luna Ashford," he said. "Former," she said. "I left the title on a stone dais 4 days ago." The corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile, something more restrained than that. "Selene, then," he said, "if that's what you want." "What I want," she said, "is to understand what you know and how you know it, and what you expect in exchange for the shelter your man offered me. In that order." Kale nodded slowly. He pulled out the chair nearest to the fire and gestured to it, not in the way of a host performing hospitality, but in the practical way of a man who had noticed she'd been riding for 4 days in inadequate clothing and was cold. "Sit down," he said. "This is going to take a while." She sat. Not because he told her to, because she wanted to, and because the fire was warm, and because she was done performing invulnerability in rooms where it wasn't necessary. He sat across from her and put both forearms on the table. "I've had someone inside Silverfang for 14 months, he said. She absorbed that. An informant. Someone who was concerned about what Vanessa Dre was doing to the Pack's eastern trade routes, he said. It started as a commercial interest. It became more. "Because you realized what she was actually doing," Selene said. "Because I realized what she was actually doing," he agreed. Selene looked at him. "Tell me." "The Treasury first," he said. "She's been moving funds out of Silverfang's reserve accounts through a proxy trade house in the border settlements. Small amounts, irregular intervals, The kind of pattern that looks like normal operating expenses if you're not watching for it. Over 14 months, the total is... He paused, and the pause was not for effect but for precision, significant enough that Silverfang cannot sustain a border conflict for more than 3 weeks without running dry. She thought about the Eastern trade disputes she had been trying to resolve for the past 6 months. The strange gaps in what should have been straightforward negotiations. The way the numbers had never quite added up when she pushed the council's treasurer on reserve projections. She thought about the 3 times she had asked Ryker directly about the Eastern account shortfalls, and the 3 times he had told her she was overcomplicating it. The rival Alpha letters, she said. 2 of the 3 are Vanessa's bloodline connections, Kael said, old alliances from before she came to Silverfang. The 3rd is a mercenary operation she's been buying for 6 months. The offer in the letters is territorial concession in exchange for military support. She intends to hold Silverfang's central ridge through external force if the pack fractures from within. And Ryker, Selene said. Something crossed Kael's face then, careful, controlled, but present. Ryker doesn't know the full extent of it, he said. He knows he has a son. He believes Vanessa is a political asset. He believes... A pause. He made a rational decision about succession. He believes he traded up, Selene said flatly. Kael looked at her steadily. Yes, she sat with that, with the fire and the weight of it, and the specific quality of being in a room with a man who was giving her clean information without softening it, without the particular condescension of someone deciding what she could handle. She had not been in a room like this in a long time. She was not entirely sure what to do with it. What do you want from me? She said. I want to stop Vanessa from destabilizing the Northern Territories, he said. When Silverfang collapses, and it will collapse, the timeline is months at this point, the fracture lines will spread. 4 packs have territorial borders inside the blast radius. Mine is one of them. He met her eyes. I need someone who knows Silverfang's internal architecture better than anyone alive. Someone who knows the council, the pack loyalties, the weak points in Vanessa's position. You need Silverfang's former Luna, she said. I need you, he said. It was not a correction of her phrasing. It was something different, and she heard the difference and chose not to look at it directly. And in exchange, she said. Protection, he said. Shadowclaw's full territorial guarantee for you and for... He stopped, and this time the pause was deliberate, and when he continued his voice had shifted slightly, something quieter underneath the directness, for whoever comes with you. She looked at him for a long moment. You're going to tell me how you know, she said. The healer you visited in the border town, he said. She's mine. Not placed there for this. But she recognized you, and she told me, and I made a decision about what to do with that information. You could have used it, Selene said, as leverage. Yes, he said simply, but you didn't. No. She looked at the table between them. The bread she hadn't touched, the water, the fire at Kael's back throwing his shadow long across the floor. She looked at all of it, and then she looked at him, and she ran the calculation she had been building for 4 days. The angles, the risks, the possible betrayals and the probable ones. The difference between a man who offered shelter as a transaction and a man who had held damaging information for 11 days and sent it back to her as protection instead. I need to know your pack's eastern border arrangement, she said. The full military structure, patrol rotations. I need access to everything your informant has documented on Vanessa's network, and I need to verify it myself before I use any of it. I won't be a source you extract and discard. She held his eyes. I will work with you. Not for you. Kael looked at her, and something in his face shifted. Not softened, nothing as simple as that, but opened, fractionally, the way a door opens when someone finally knocks in the right way. Agreed, he said. And I want a room with a lock, she said. Mine. Done. And I want your informant's name. A pause. The longest pause since she'd walked into the room. That, he said, I'll give you when I'm certain you're staying. She held the pause with him, matched it. The fire cracked and the room was warm, and outside she could hear the settlement sounds of a pack that was functioning, that had been built by someone who understood the difference between authority that was earned and authority that was performed. When will you be certain? She said. When you stop looking for the exit, he said. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she picked up the bread and ate it, and the meal was plain and good, and Kyle Draven sat across from her and said nothing else. And the silence between them was the kind of silence that exists between two people who are still deciding what the other one is worth. She was in the middle of deciding when the door opened. Davin. His face had changed from the controlled expression he'd worn for 4 days of riding. There was something in it now that she associated with intelligence arriving faster than expected. The Silverfang Council has sent a rider, he said, looking at Kyle. They're not looking for her. He glanced at Selene. They're asking for her. Selene set down the bread. The council sent a rider to Shadowclaw territory, she said. Officially. With a Silverfang seal, Davin said. Addressed to you by name. She looked at Kale. He was watching her with the particular stillness of a man who had just seen a calculation he'd been running for months take an unexpected turn. Open it, she said to Davin. He crossed the room and laid the sealed letter on the table in front of her. The wax carried the Silverfang mark, Council seal, not Alpha seal, which meant this had not come from Ryker. She broke it and read. The letter was short. 4 sentences from Elder Fenwick, whose voice she had heard rising from his carved bench on the night she walked away. The first sentence told her that rogue attacks on Silverfang's southern border had begun 48 hours after the ceremony. The second told her that 2 of the pack's 3 senior supply coordinators had resigned rather than answer to Vanessa's new household. The third told her that 6 council members had privately requested a formal hearing on the succession announcement's legitimacy under pack law. The fourth sentence was the one that made her set the letter down and look at the wall for a moment before she trusted her face. We believe the Luna Crest was removed under coercion, and we are requesting your return to contest the succession before the council formally endorses it. She felt Kyle's eyes on her. Well, she said. Well, he said. She picked up the letter again and folded it with the careful precision of someone who had just been handed something that changed the shape of everything, and understood it, and was not yet ready to say so out loud. She was here. She had crossed into Shadowclaw territory carrying a secret and nothing else. She had made an agreement with a man she'd known for less than an hour. She had a letter from 6 council members and a pack fracturing 4 days' ride south, and in her body she carried the living proof of what Ryker had dismissed as impossible, the heir he had declared she could never give him, the one card in this entire collapsing hand that nobody, not Vanessa, not Ryker, not the 3 rival alphas with their sealed offers, had accounted for. She set the letter on the table. She looked at Kale Draven. I need a map, she said. Shadowclaw's full northern border, and I need your fastest riders available by morning. Something moved in his expression, and not surprise, not triumph, just the quiet settling of a man watching someone decide to fight. You're staying, he said. I'm not staying, she said. I'm building something. There's a difference. She held his gaze. You said you needed someone who knew Silverfang's internal architecture. Yes. Then you should know, she said, and her voice was level and deliberate and carried the specific weight of a woman who had spent 9 years learning exactly what she was worth and had only just, in the past 4 days, stopped letting someone else decide it, that the architecture is more compromised than you know. Vanessa's network goes deeper than your informant's reports. I know exactly how deep, because I watched it happen and I spent 2 years telling myself it wasn't strategic. She pressed her palm flat on the folded letter. She has a contact inside the Shadowclaw Eastern trade routes, Selene said. Not a new contact, an old one. And if she's already moved to burn my exits and seal the council before the ceremony was cold, she knows you offered me shelter. The room went still. Kale's jaw tightened fractionally, the first crack in the control he'd been holding since she walked through the door. You're saying my informant. I'm saying your network has been seen, Selene said. And Vanessa Dre does not leave a network standing once she's seen it. She burns the exits first. She held his eyes. I know because she burned mine. Outside the room, the settlement sounds continued. Children running, market stalls. The ordinary noise of a pack that did not yet know the storm that was already inside its walls. Kyle Draven looked at her across the table, and she watched him absorb the full shape of what she was telling him. watched the alpha in him take it in and begin the rapid, experienced reorganization of a man who had been in enough bad situations to know the difference between a threat and a catastrophe. "How long," he said, "do we have?" Selene looked at the letter in front of her. Then she looked at him. "Not long enough to be careful," she said. "Long enough to be smart." The map was wrong. Selene saw it in the first 10 minutes, standing at the long table in Kael's war room with 3 of his senior wolves and the full spread of Shadowclaw's eastern border documentation laid out under lamplight. She saw it the way she saw most things that were wrong, not in one obvious place, but in the accumulation of small details that didn't align, the way a story with a lie in it will hold together until you press on the specific seam where the fabrication meets the truth. "This patrol rotation," she said, putting her finger on the eastern corridor. "It runs a 6-hour cycle." Kael's eastern commander, a broad-shouldered woman named Risa, with close-cropped gray hair and the flat patience of someone who had stopped being surprised by anything, looked at the map. "It does. Your informant's reports show a gap in coverage between the 3rd and 4th hour, every cycle." Selene looked up. "That's not a gap. That's a door." Risa looked at Kael. Something passed between them that Selene couldn't fully read. Not guilt, not quite, but the specific discomfort of a confirmation arriving from the wrong direction. "We know about the gap," Risa said. "You know about it," Selene said, "and you left it." "We use it," Kael said from across the table, "for our own runners, border communications that don't go through formal channels." Selene looked at him. "Who else knows you use it?" The silence that followed lasted long enough to be its own answer. She straightened. "Your informant knows." "My informant created it," Kael said, and the way he said it, flat, controlled, the voice of a man delivering a fact he had already processed and set into the architecture of his decisions, told her this was not new information to him. "I know. I've known for 6 weeks." She stared at him. "You've known for 6 weeks," she said, "that your informant is compromised, and you sent 3 men into Silverfang territory on the night of the Moonfire ceremony using intelligence from that same informant." "The intelligence on Vanessa's treasury movements is clean," he said. "I verified it through 3 separate sources." "And the intelligence that told you where I would be," she said. "The night of the ceremony, the timing, the direction I'd run." A pause, just a beat, but she caught it. "Kael," she said, and the way his name came out of her mouth was not a question, but a blade, flat and specific, held to a very particular point. "Did Vanessa know your men would be at the base of that rock shelf?" He met her eyes. "I believe she may have expected it." The room was very quiet. Selene turned away from the table. She put her back to all of them and looked at the wall and breathed, slow and deliberate, and did the internal work of a woman who had been surprised once in the past week and had privately committed to never being surprised again, and was now being surprised again. She felt it move through her the way cold moves through stone. Not fast, not dramatic, just thorough. Penetrating every layer until the thing it touched was changed in temperature and would not warm easily. Vanessa had not just planned her humiliation at the ceremony. She had planned her escape route. She had planned this room, possibly this conversation. She turned back. "Tell me what you know," she said. "All of it, not the version you were deciding whether I could handle. Everything." Kael looked at her for a long moment. Then he sent Risa and the other 2 wolves out of the room with a look, and when the door closed behind them, he pulled out a chair and sat, and for the first time since she'd arrived, he looked like a man who was tired of carrying something alone. "The informant's name is Thomas Ray," he said. He was Silverfang's secondary council secretary before Vanessa's arrival. When she began systematically replacing Ryker's inner circle, Thomas came to me with financial records he said he'd copied before she could destroy them. I used those records for 14 months. He paused. 8 weeks ago, Risa found evidence that Thomas had been sending reports in both directions, to me and back to Vanessa. "He was hers from the beginning," Selene said. "Possibly, or she turned him. The distinction matters less than the result." Kael looked at the map. "Everything I believed about Vanessa's network, her timeline, her military contacts, It was curated. She gave me accurate information on the Treasury movements because she needed me to believe the source was legitimate. She gave me accurate information on her rival Alpha letters because she needed me to feel like I was ahead of her. Selene looked at him. And the information about me. Your visit to the healer, he said. I believe that was real, but that it reached me when it did, in the form it did. I can't rule out that Tomas accelerated it. She thought about this, about the specific shape of it. A woman who had engineered her public humiliation had also engineered her rescue, had built a corridor out of Silverfang with Shadowclaw hands and pointed Selene directly through it, had given her a safe room and a warm fire, and a man with clean eyes who offered her protection with no conditions, and all of it, had been constructed. The question that mattered was not whether she had been moved. She had been moved. The question was where she had been moved to and why. What does she gain, Selene said, from having me here? Kael's jaw was tight. She gains a narrative. The abandoned Luna, running to a rival Alpha's territory, carrying his... He stopped himself. Carrying his child's heir, Selene said, finishing it without flinching because flinching was a luxury she had used up on the rock shelf 4 nights ago. The story Vanessa tells the pack is that I fled to Shadowclaw, formed an alliance, and am now a foreign threat to Silverfang's sovereignty. She paused. With a child she can claim belongs to you. The silence landed like something dropped from a height. Kyle looked at her with an expression that was the most unguarded she had seen from him. Not shock, he was too experienced for shock, but something adjacent, the particular stillness of a man recalibrating in real time. If she can attach that narrative to the Council's request for your return, he said slowly, she doesn't just discredit your succession claim. She discredits the Council members who signed the letter. She paints Fenwick and the others as co-conspirators in a foreign play for Silverfang's throne. And she eliminates every legitimate challenge to her son's succession in a single move, Selene said. Yes. She walked back to the table. She looked at the map, the wrong patrol gaps and the curated intelligence and the 14 months of careful feeding that had built a trap with Shadowclaw's walls, and Kael Draven's genuine, probably real, possibly weaponized desire to protect her. She thought about Fenwick's letter. 4 sentences. 6 council members. How fast can a rider get a message to the Silverfang Council? She said. 3 days, Kael said. But Selena, if Vanessa has a contact in my eastern routes, she has eyes on any rider I send. I know, Selene said. I'm not sending a rider. He looked at her. I'm going myself, she said. The room changed in a way that had nothing to do with sound or movement. Kael stood. Not fast, controlled, the way he did everything. But the rise had weight behind it. You've been in Shadowclaw territory for less than a day, he said. Silverfang is 4 days' ride. If Vanessa's military contacts are mobilizing on her timeline, they are, Selene said, which is why 4 days is too long. Then what? The river crossing we used, she said. There's a cutback trail through the limestone ridge. I saw it on the 2nd day from the eastern high ground. If it goes where I think it goes, it cuts 2 days off the return route. He looked at her steadily. That trail isn't on any map. No, she said. That's why Vanessa doesn't know about it. Something shifted in him then. She watched it happen, watched the Alpha in him conflict with something else, something that ran deeper than authority and was harder to name. He was looking at her the way people look at things they don't want to see clearly because clarity is going to cost them something. You go back to Silverfang now, he said, before the council hearing is formally convened, without documentation, without political standing, with Vanessa's narrative already in the air. They could arrest you at the gates. They could, she said. Selene. She's had 14 months, Kael, Selene said, and her voice came out harder than she intended, and she did not soften it. 14 months to build this. Every exit I had inside Silverfang was burned before I walked out the door. Every source of information you had was fed to you from her hand. She planned this from the inside with the patience of someone who understood that the only way to defeat a Luna who had built genuine loyalty was to make sure that loyalty had nowhere to anchor when everything fell. She looked at him. If I wait, She finishes. If I move now, she has to react instead of execute. Those are different things. He was quiet for a long moment. The council letter, he finally said. It changes the legal ground under her feet, Selene said. 6 council members requesting a formal hearing on succession legitimacy is not a personal grievance. It's a structural challenge. She can dismiss a disgraced Luna. She cannot dismiss a formal council motion without invoking pack law against the council itself, and if she does that, she fractures the institutional loyalty she needs to hold the pack together, Kael said. He was following it now, his own mind running the chain. And if the pack fractures before her military contacts arrive, she has no internal ground to hand them, Selene said. The invasion becomes an occupation. An occupation turns every neutral wolf into a resistance. Kyle looked at the map for a long moment. Then he looked at her. I'm coming with you, he said. She had expected an argument. The bluntness of his statement stopped her for a beat. You can't commit Shadowclaw forces to a Silverfang internal dispute without formal invitation from, I'm not committing forces, he said. I'm coming with you. She looked at him. Why? Because my network has been feeding Vanessa Dre information about your location and your condition for 11 days, he said. And there was something in his voice then, not apology. He was not the kind of man who led with apology, but an honesty that sat in the room the way Fenwick's letter sat on the table, heavy and specific and impossible to walk away from. And because you're carrying a child in a hostile territory with every exit mapped by your enemy, and I told you in that meeting room that you would not carry that alone. She looked at him for a long time. She was thinking about trust, about what it cost to extend it in a room where she had just had confirmed for her that her last calculated risk had been engineered. She was thinking about the difference between a trap and an ally who had been used as one without knowing it, and whether that distinction was enough, whether it was a distinction she could afford to make. She thought about the rock shelf, the dark valley, the specific moment she had looked back at the moonfire torches and understood she was done asking permission to be worth something. We leave at dawn, she said. They made the limestone trail in a day and a half. It was not a trail exactly, more the memory of one, a route that had been used before and then forgotten by everyone except the terrain itself, which remembered everything. Selene navigated from the visual geometry she had stored on the second day's writing, cross-referencing with the river's sound below them when the ground was too dense to see. Kael rode behind her and did not question her directions once, which was its own kind of statement. They had 4 riders with them. Davin and 3 others Kael had selected himself. Wolves he trusted in the specific, tested way that came from shared blood on real ground, rather than the word of an informant. On the second night, camped in a hollow where the ridge broke open into a flat shelf of ancient stone, Selene woke at the 3rd hour to a sound she couldn't immediately place. She was upright before she was fully awake. That combat reflex again, and she had 3 seconds of disorientation before she understood what she was hearing. Hoofbeats. From the south. Moving fast without the organized spacing of a patrol. Erratic, urgent, the sound of someone riding alone and hard. Kael was already on his feet. The rider came through the tree line at a breaking pace and nearly fell from the horse pulling up short, and Davin had the man off the saddle and standing before anyone else moved. He was young, one of the Shadowclaw border runners. She recognized the token at his neck, and he had the specific look of someone who had been riding without rest and was going to deliver his message before he fell over. Alpha. He was breathing in hard pulls. Silverfang's southern border fell this morning. Nobody spoke. 2 of Vanessa's military contacts moved simultaneously. They're calling it a peacekeeping response to internal instability. He looked between Kael and Selene with the focused panic of a young man who understood the weight of what he was carrying. And there's a rider ahead of us. We caught up to him on the lower trail. He was carrying Alpha. He was carrying a Silverfang council seal. Kael held the runner's eyes. What was his message? The young man looked at Selene. Elder Fenwick is dead, he said. The night air moved through the trees and the fire crackled, and somewhere below the ridge the river was running. The same river she had crossed 4 days ago from a different life. And Selene stood on the stone shelf and felt the information arrive in her body in layers. Not shock, She was past the architecture of shock, had burned through it, and come out into the colder country beyond it. What she felt was the specific, terrible recognition of someone watching a plan close around them from the outside in. Fenwick, who had stood from his carved bench on the night she walked away, who had addressed her by title when Ryker had already stripped it, who had organized 6 names onto a formal letter and sent it with a council seal to Shadowclaw territory and thereby signed his own. She stopped that thought. The other council members, she said. The 5 who signed. The runner shook his head. The message didn't say. She looked at Kyle. He was watching her with the expression of a man who understood what the next sentence was going to be and had already made his decision about it. She's not waiting for her military contacts to stabilize the territory before she moves on the council, Selene said. She's moving on both simultaneously, which means she's not afraid of internal fracture anymore. Because she has the external force to absorb it, Kyle said, which means our timeline just collapsed. Selene looked at the dark below the ridge. How far are we from Silverfang's northern gate? Half a day, Davin said, if we push. She turned to Kyle, and there it was between them, the full shape of what she had walked into, what he had unknowingly helped build, the trap that had been assembled around both of them with 14 months of patience and the specific genius of a woman who understood that the most effective cage is the one you build yourself. Everything Selene had was here, her knowledge, her body, the living evidence of the one thing Vanessa could not manufacture. And on the other side of half a day's hard riding, Silverfang was fracturing under external occupation, a dead elder, and a pack that had been hollowed out from the inside by a woman who had watched Selene for 2 years and learned exactly where every load-bearing wall stood. She knew, with the cold clarity that had become her closest companion in the past week, that if she rode through Silverfang's northern gate tomorrow without a plan that could move faster than Vanessa's network, she was not going to get a second chance. There would be no rock shelf, no dark valley to disappear into. Vanessa had burned the exits, all of them, including the ones Selene hadn't known about yet. She looked at Kyle. He looked back. And she understood. Standing on that limestone shelf with a dead elder and an occupied border and the cold stars overhead, that the woman she had been inside Silverfang, the one who had managed and endured and survived by making herself indispensable to someone else's power, that woman could not walk through those gates tomorrow and win. That version of her had been useful. That version of her was finished. What walked in tomorrow had to be something different, something that did not wait to be recognized, something that had stopped asking for a seat at the table and was prepared to take the table itself. She pressed her hand to her side once, briefly, the private gesture she allowed herself only when no one was supposed to be watching. Kyle was watching. She took her hand away. "We ride at first light," she said, "and when we reach the gate, you let me speak first." He looked at her for a long moment. A man accustomed to walking into rooms first and leaving last. A man whose authority over his own territory was so absolute it had become like breathing, automatic and unconsidered. "Yes," he said. She turned to the fire and looked into it, not for warmth, but for the thing fires have always given to people sitting in the dark before a decision they cannot take back. The simple animal proof that something is still burning, that the cold has not won yet, that there is still enough left to move forward on. Behind her, Kyle began giving quiet orders to his riders, and somewhere south of the limestone ridge, inside the walls of the pack she had given 9 years of her life to, Vanessa Dre sat in a room that had once been Selene's and made the final moves of a game she believed she had already won. She was not wrong about the game. She was wrong about who was still playing. They reached Silverfang's northern approach at mid-morning. The tree line broke 200 yards from the gate, and Selene pulled her horse up at the edge of it, in the shadow of the last pines, and looked at what had changed in 5 days. The outer wall was standing. The gate was standing. But there were unfamiliar wolves on the wall walk. Not Silverfang gray, not Shadowclaw colors, something else. A dark burgundy she recognized from intelligence reports as the mark of the iron-mouth mercenary contractors Vanessa had been buying for 6 months. 4 of them visible from here, which meant twice that number on the ground inside. Kyle pulled up beside her. He looked at the wall and said nothing for a moment. "How many of yours inside the walls?" she said. 12, he said. Placed over the past 3 months through the eastern trade routes, before I knew the routes were watched. She thought about that. 12 Shadowclaw wolves inside Silverfang's walls, who may or may not still be free, may or may not have been identified through Tomas Ray's double reporting, may or may not be walking into the same trap she was. Send Davin around to the eastern postern, she said. There's a service gate behind the granary that the wall guards can't see from the walkway. It has a Silverfang council lock, 7-pin. The combination is 3 left, 1 right, 4 left. She paused. I set the combination myself. Vanessa doesn't know it. Davin was already looking at Kyle for confirmation. Kale gave it with a look. Davin peeled off into the trees with one rider behind him, silent and fast. The remaining 2 with us, Selene said, and they stay back. Selene. She'll have eyes on the northern approach, Selene said. 2 riders entering is a scouting pair. 4 is a statement. I need to be at that gate before she has time to frame what she's seeing. He looked at her. She could feel the specific resistance of a man whose every instinct was telling him to put himself between her and the thing ahead, and who was being asked instead to stand behind her. She understood the instinct. She did not have time for it. You said you'd let me speak first, she said. A beat. His jaw tightened once. Yes, he said. She rode out of the tree line. The ironmouth guards on the wall walk saw her at 150 yards. She watched them see her, the shift in posture, the quick exchange between them, one of them already moving toward a signal horn. She kept her horse at a steady walk, not slow enough to look like hesitation, not fast enough to look like threat. The specific pace of someone who had decided where they were going and expected the road to accommodate them. At 50 yards, a voice came from the wall. Gates closed to outside traffic by order of... I know whose order, Selene said. Her voice carried cleanly in the cold morning air. Open the gate. Silence from the wall. The guard who had spoken looked to his left at someone she couldn't see from this angle. I said open it, she said, still walking, and her voice had the particular quality she had spent 9 years developing in council rooms and border negotiations and the specific, unpleasant conversations that happened between packs, when diplomacy was the only alternative to war. The quality of someone who was not asking. Or explain to whoever's giving you orders why you turned away the mother of Silverfang's blood heir at the northern gate in front of a Shadowclaw Alpha witness. Another pause. Longer. The gate opened. She rode through without looking up at the guards, because looking up would have acknowledged that the choice had been theirs to make. It had not been theirs to make. She had made it for them. That was the first thing. Inside the walls, Silverfang looked like a pack that had been sick for a long time and was only now showing the symptoms. The central market was operating. People moved, commerce happened. But there was a tension in the movement, the way people walk when they're accustomed to checking over their shoulder. 3 ironmouth wolves stood at the entrance to the main hall, 2 more near the council chambers. She counted them as she rode through the main avenue without stopping, without slowing, letting herself be seen, letting the pack see that she was here, and that she was not hiding, and that she was not asking for permission to occupy the ground she had built. Wolves stopped to watch her. She recognized faces. Pack members who had been at the moonfire ceremony, who had watched her walk away from the dais. She saw the range of reactions move through them. Surprise, confusion, something that in some faces was relief so raw it looked almost like grief. A woman near the grain stalls pressed her hand to her mouth. An older man in council gray straightened from his stall and held her eyes and gave her a single deliberate nod that carried 9 years of history in it. She kept moving. She was 30 feet from the main hall steps when the doors opened. Vanessa Dre came out onto the steps with 2 ironmouth bodyguards flanking her and the particular composure of a woman who had been informed of this arrival and had taken 30 seconds to arrange herself for it. She was in formal colors today, Silverfang gray, which was a deliberate provocation, the colors of the pack she had not been born into and had not earned. She looked at Selene on horseback with an expression that was almost perfectly neutral, the expression of someone who had rehearsed this moment in detail and was now delivering the performance. Luna Ashford, Vanessa said. Former, Kale said, from directly behind Selene, and the word landed in the courtyard like a stone dropped in still water, because it was the same word Selene had used in the Shadowclaw meeting room, except now it was in Kyle Draven's voice in Silverfang's courtyard, and it meant something entirely different. She chose to leave that title. You did not take it from her. Two entirely different things. Vanessa's eyes moved to Kyle. Something shifted in them, just for a fraction of a second. The specific recalibration of someone encountering a variable that arrived off schedule. Alpha Draven, she said. Silverfang isn't receiving outside visitors during the current... Where's Ryker? Selene said. Vanessa looked back at her. The Alpha is managing the southern border situation. The southern border you opened, Selene said. A pause. Clean and deliberate. I don't know what you've been told in Shadowclaw territory, Vanessa said, and her voice was pleasant, genuinely pleasant, the voice of someone who had learned that pleasantness was the most destabilizing tone you could use on a person who expected hostility. But the southern border intervention was requested by the Alpha himself as a temporary security measure during a period of internal... Fenwick is dead, Selene said. Vanessa did not blink. Elder Fenwick passed from illness. He had been unwell for... He was sending letters 2 days ago, Selene said. Council-sealed, formal, legally documented challenges to the succession announcement. Men who are sending legal correspondence 2 days before they die of illness are not ill. She looked at Vanessa steadily. Where are the other 5 council members who signed that letter? Something changed in the courtyard. She felt it before she could point to what caused it. The specific atmospheric shift of a space where too many people are listening, and at least some of them are starting to hear something they had individually suspected and collectively refused to acknowledge. Wolves had stopped moving. The market sounds had dropped. It was not silence, but it was the close approximation of it, the kind of quiet that a place makes when everyone in it has paused to pay attention. Vanessa smiled. It was a good smile, controlled, slightly sorrowful, the smile of someone performing reluctant concern. Selene, she said, softening her voice, I understand you're in a very difficult... Don't, Selene said. Just that word, flat and precise. The smile stayed on Vanessa's face, but something behind it adjusted. The council members, Selene said again. Where are they? Under protective custody, Vanessa said, dropping the gentle tone. Pending review of whether their communication with a foreign territory constitutes a breach of pact loyalty. She let that land. Then she looked at Kyle. A communication that appears now to have been even more problematic than we initially understood, given that the foreign Alpha in question appears to have escorted our former Luna directly to our gates. She was good. Selene had always known she was good. The move was clean. She had just reframed the council letter, Selene's arrival, and Kyle's presence as a single coordinated foreign interference, and she had done it in 30 seconds in a courtyard full of witnesses. Selene dismounted. She did not ask for help. She did not look at Kyle. She came down from the saddle and she walked to the bottom of the main hall steps, and she looked up at Vanessa with the 5 stairs between them, and she was aware of her own body, the road dust and the torn hem of a gown she'd been wearing for 5 days, the dark circles under her eyes, the specific, undeniable physical evidence of a woman who had been surviving rather than performing, and she understood, standing there, that the appearance was not a weakness. It was a testimony. Every wolf in this courtyard could see what the past 5 days had cost and what she had come back through them to do. Call a pack assembly, Selene said. Vanessa looked down at her. I don't think... You have iron-mouthed mercenaries on your walls, Selene said, loudly enough for the courtyard to carry it. You have council members in custody. You have foreign military contracts active on the southern border. And you are standing on the steps of a hall that belongs to the pack you have been systematically dismantling for 14 months. She held Vanessa's eyes. Call a pack assembly. Let every wolf in Silverfang hear what I have to say. Or let every wolf in this courtyard watch you refuse. A long, taut silence. Somewhere to her right, a door opened. She registered it peripherally. The side entrance to the main hall, the one that connected to the Alpha's private corridor. She heard the footsteps before she turned. Ryker came through the door. He looked terrible. She registered this with the detached precision of someone cataloging a situation, not the residual tenderness of someone who had once loved what she was looking at. He was carrying an injury, right shoulder, badly wrapped, the bandage already showing through his outer shirt. And he had the particular hollowness of a man who had not slept properly in days, who had been running on authority and pride and the stubborn animal refusal to let anyone see him falter, and who was now standing in a courtyard with all of that failing simultaneously. He saw her. For one unguarded second, his face did something she had not seen it do in 2 years. Something broke through the granite certainty of it. Not relief, not love, not even guilt exactly, but the specific expression of a man confronting the full weight of a mistake in the moment it is too late to correct it, and too early to know if it is too late to survive it. "Selene," he said. She looked at him, just looked. 9 years moving through her like weather, like the cold that had moved through her on the rock shelf, thorough and permanent and done. "Ryker," she said, "tell your gate guards to stand down and call a pack assembly. Now." He stared at her. "Tell them," she said, and her voice was not angry. Anger would have meant she still wanted something from him, and she was past that. She had been past it since she set the crest down on the dais stone. "Or I will tell this entire courtyard what Vanessa has done with Silverfang's treasury, and I will tell them with the documented proof I have been building for 6 months, and I will let them decide what kind of alpha allows it." Ryker looked from her to Vanessa. Vanessa's face was still composed, still performing, but her eyes had moved, briefly, to Kael. And in that fraction of a second, Selene caught the thing she had been looking for, the specific flicker of a plan encountering something it had not fully accounted for. Not fear, calculation. The rapid, experienced assessment of a woman deciding whether to escalate or reframe. She decided to escalate. "She's carrying Draven's child," Vanessa said. The courtyard went absolutely still. Vanessa said it to Ryker, directly to Ryker, and her voice had a surgical quality, not shouted, not performed, just delivered with the flat authority of a woman stating a fact she had been saving for the moment of maximum impact. She turned to include the courtyard in the next sentence. She went directly to Shadowclaw territory the night she left. She has been in Alpha Draven's hold for 5 days, and now she comes back here carrying a Shadowclaw heir and trying to claim Silverfang succession rights on its behalf. The courtyard absorbed this. Selene felt the air change, felt the doubt move through it. Not universal, not complete, but real. The seed of it planting itself in the faces of wolves who didn't have the information to counter the narrative and whose trust in Selene, however genuine, had been tested by 5 days of absence and Vanessa's 14 months of groundwork. She could answer it. She had the answer. 11 days. She had known for 11 days before she ever set foot in Shadowclaw territory. She had the healer's record from the border town. She had the dates. She could deliver it all right here, right now, in front of every wolf in this courtyard. But she looked at Ryker when she decided what to say next. She looked at him because he was the only person in this courtyard whose reaction to the truth would be visible to everyone watching, and she had been reading Ryker Vale's face for 9 years, and she knew that what she said next was going to move across his face like weather before he could stop it, and that every wolf in this courtyard was going to see it happen. "This child," Selene said, and her voice was clean and level and carried to every corner of the open space, "was conceived inside Silverfang's walls in the 3rd month of this year, 2 months before the Moonfire ceremony. Your healers have the records from my examination. I visited under my own name because I had nothing to hide." She paused. "Ask Ryker whose child this is." Every head in the courtyard turned to Ryker, and there it was. Across his face, exactly as she had known it would be. Not the reaction of a man hearing something for the first time, but the reaction of a man hearing confirmed what he had suspected and had not been willing to confront. And the confirmation was not relief, not joy, not the simple arithmetic of learning a thing and adjusting to it. It was devastation, the specific total devastation of a man watching the cost of his own decision arrive in full. He had known, or he had half known, or he had chosen not to know because not knowing was the architecture that kept everything else standing, and now it was standing in his courtyard covered in road dust with evidence in one hand and Kyle Draven at its back, and the architecture was coming down. Vanessa turned to look at him. For the first time since Selene had ridden through the gate, Vanessa's composure showed a crack. Not in her expression held, but in her body, in the way her shoulders adjusted by a fraction, the weight of the moment landing differently than she had anticipated. "Ryker," Vanessa said. Her voice carried a note Selene had never heard in it before, not quite warning, not quite plea, something in between. Ryker was not looking at Vanessa. He was looking at Selene, looking at her the way men look when they have broken something irreplaceable and are standing close enough to see every piece of it on the ground. "Is it mine?" he said. The words came out rough and quiet, and stripped of everything. The authority, the performance, the alpha register he had been using since he was 20 years old. Just a man asking a question he should have asked 11 days ago, or 6 months ago, or 2 years ago, or the first morning he had chosen something easy over something real. Selene looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the courtyard full of wolves who were watching everything, who had watched her place down a crest and walk into the dark and come back through it, who were going to carry whatever happened next in this courtyard for the rest of their lives. "Call the assembly," she said. "Let me speak, and then you'll have your answer." Behind her she heard Kyle shift in the saddle, a single small movement, and she did not need to turn around to know what his face was doing. She knew, the way she had started to know things about him in the past 5 days, with the particular dangerous speed of knowing that came from proximity to someone who did not waste words or gestures or space. From the southern wall, a horn sounded. One long note, then 2 short. Davin's signal. He was through the postern gate. He was inside the walls. And from the same direction, a second sound arrived. Not a horn, not a signal. The organized, unmistakable percussion of a large mounted force approaching Silverfang's southern gate. Not her force. Not Kyle's. The sound of Vanessa's military contacts arriving on the timeline Selene had already calculated was too early. The trap was closing from the outside now. Kyle's horse moved up beside her in a single controlled step, and his voice came down to her, quiet and direct, for her alone. "Tell me what you need," he said. She looked at the southern wall, at the iron-mouthed guards who were moving on the wall walk toward the signal position, at Ryker, standing 5 feet from her with the wreckage of his certainty visible on his face, at Vanessa, who had turned to assess the southern approach with the rapid, recalibrating attention of a woman deciding whether the arrival was early enough to save her or late enough to doom her. Selene looked at all of it. She thought about what she had told herself on the limestone shelf. Not the Luna who had walked away in tears. Not the woman who survived by making herself indispensable to someone else's power. Something different. Something that had been under all of it for 9 years, like bedrock under soft ground. That had been there through the border wars and the famine winter and the loss and the 2 years of watching herself be dismantled piece by piece by a man who didn't understand what he was taking apart. You don't run out of options until you're dead. She turned to the courtyard, to the pack wolves watching, the iron-mouthed guards on the wall, Ryker standing at the hall entrance, Vanessa on the steps above her. And she understood with complete cold clarity that the next 30 seconds were going to decide not just her life and the life she was carrying, but the shape of everything that came after. She put her hand into the saddlebag behind her and drew out the single item she had taken from the Shadowclaw war room before they left. Tomas Rey's full documented report, 14 months of Vanessa's network, every treasury transfer, every military contract, every name. She held it up so the courtyard could see it. "Wolves of Silverfang," she said, and her voice came out like something forged rather than spoken, shaped under pressure into its final form. "My name is Selene Ashford. I was your Luna for 9 years, and what I am about to tell you is going to determine whether this pack survives the next hour." The southern horn sounded again. Closer now. And Ryker Vale, Alpha of Silverfang, battered and hollow and standing in the rubble of every decision he had made in the past 2 years, looked at the woman he had destroyed and then looked at the gate that was about to open against them both, and made the only choice that had any chance of meaning anything at all. He stepped forward. He stood beside her. The southern gate held for 11 minutes. That was how long it took for Davin and the wolves he had gathered through the postern entrance. Shadowclaw fighters, and Silverfang pack members who had been waiting, in the way that people wait when they have been hoping for something and had stopped letting themselves believe it would arrive, to reach the wall and turn the Ironmouth guards away from the gate mechanism. 11 minutes during which Selene stood in the courtyard with Tomas Ray's documents in her hand and Ryker Vale at her side and read aloud every treasury transfer, every military contract, every name. She did not perform it. She did not modulate her voice for effect or pause for impact or shape the delivery the way she had shaped 100 council addresses over 9 years. She just read it, cleanly, accurately, loudly enough to carry to every corner of the courtyard. The facts were the performance. The facts had always been enough. The only question had ever been whether anyone was standing in a position to say them out loud without being removed from the room first. She was standing in that position now. The wolves listened. Not all of them believed immediately. Belief was not the point, not in the first 11 minutes. The point was that the information was now in the air, spoken in a courtyard with witnesses, documented and dated and attributed, impossible to unspeak. Vanessa could contest it. She could reframe it. She could perform outrage and demand verification and buy herself hours or days of institutional uncertainty. But she could not put those words back into the document, and the document back into the saddlebag, and the saddlebag back into the Shadowclaw war room where it had been when no one in Silverfang knew it existed. That door was closed. When the gate mechanism stopped moving and the horn from the south went unanswered, Selene heard Vanessa's bodyguard shift behind her on the steps. She did not turn around. She finished the last page. Then she looked up at the courtyard and let the silence settle. Ryker spoke first. "The mercenary contracts," he said. His voice was controlled, but barely. The control of a man holding something together through will alone, the internal architecture straining at every joint. He was looking at Vanessa. "The Southern intervention. I authorized a temporary security arrangement. I did not authorize foreign military contracts on Silverfang soil." Vanessa looked at him. She had the specific composure of someone who has run the numbers in real time and understood that the position has shifted, but the game is not finished. "You authorized what I arranged," she said. "You signed the documents, Ryker." "Show me the documents," he said. A pause. "Show me," he said again, and his voice had dropped into something she had heard it do only a few times. Not the Alpha Register, not the performance of authority, but the voice underneath that, the one that was just a man who had finally run out of the particular willingness to not know things. "Show me exactly what I signed." Vanessa looked at him for a long moment. She made a decision. Selene watched her make it, watched the precise internal moment when a person who has been playing the long game decides that the long game is over, and what remains is whether to burn the ground or surrender it. It moved across Vanessa's face in less than a second, and then was gone, replaced by the blank, still expression of someone who has stopped performing entirely because there is no longer any audience worth performing for. She turned and walked back through the main hall doors. Her bodyguards followed. Nobody stopped her. Selene had thought about this, about the specific decision of whether to have Vanessa physically detained in the courtyard, whether the moment required that kind of hard punctuation. She had decided against it. Detention in the courtyard was theater. What Vanessa was walking back into was a closed building with Davin's wolves now moving through the interior corridors, with the Ironmouth guards on the wall being systematically relieved of their positions, with the 5 council members in protective custody about to be released by pack wolves who had been waiting for someone to open the door. Vanessa was not escaping. She was walking into the end of her own architecture, and she knew it. Some defeats announce themselves. Others are simply the moment when you stop running and the thing behind you arrives. The southern horn went silent. From the wall walk, one of Davin's riders called down, "Southern force is holding position. They're not advancing." Selene closed her eyes for one breath. Without internal support, without the gate opening on schedule, without the narrative of a successful internal seizure to legitimize their presence, the mercenary force outside the southern wall had become exactly what they were, a paid-for asset with no legal standing on sovereign pact territory, waiting for instructions that were not going to come. They would hold for hours, maybe a day, calculating whether the cost of forcing the gate was worth what was on the other side. It wasn't. Vanessa's contracts had specified terms of engagement that required internal coordination. Without it, the mercenary commander was looking at an unprovoked assault on a territorial pack with a Shadowclaw Alpha inside the walls as witness. That was not a war. That was a massacre of their own reputation. They would leave by nightfall. Ryker was still standing beside her. She became aware of it again. The specific quality of his presence, the familiar weight of it, 9 years of standing next to this man in rooms that required both of them to be at their absolute best and neither of them to flinch. She had known his silences. She had known the precise vocabulary of his breathing in difficult moments, the way he held his shoulder when he was carrying something he wasn't ready to say out loud. He was holding it now. Right shoulder, the injury. "You need a healer," she said. "I know," he said. Neither of them moved. Around them, the courtyard had begun its slow return to something functional, wolves moving with purpose. Davin's people organizing the wall transition, pack members who had been frozen in place during the reading now speaking quietly to each other in the way people speak when they have just witnessed something that is going to require a long time to process and are beginning that processing in real time. "How long have you known?" Ryker said. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the southern wall. "About the treasury." 6 months, she said. "The numbers in the Eastern account projections. I asked you 3 times. I told you it was fine." "Yes." A long pause. She heard him exhale, slow and controlled, the exhale of a man who is not releasing anything but is making room to carry more. "I chose to believe it was fine," he said. "I chose to believe a great many things that were convenient to believe." She did not answer that. There was nothing to add to it that would be useful to either of them. "The child," he said. "Is yours," she said. "March. Inside these walls. Before any of this." He closed his eyes for a moment. Just a moment. And when he opened them, there was something in his face she had not expected to see, and did not know what to do with. Not the relief she might have predicted, and not the guilt she had prepared herself for, but something rawer and less manageable than either. Something that looked, in the flat morning light of a courtyard that still smelled like dust, and the particular residue of a thing barely survived, like grief. The honest, undefended kind. The kind that arrives after the crisis has passed and leaves you nowhere to direct it. "Selene," he said, and stopped. She looked at him. 9 years in her body, in her hands, in the specific way her chest tightened when she heard her name in his voice. She looked at him and she let herself feel the full weight of it. Not performed, not managed, just felt. The way you feel a scar when the weather changes. The deep tissue acknowledgement of something that healed imperfectly and will tell you about it for the rest of your life. "Don't," she said, quietly. No sharpness in it. He looked at her. "Not because I don't want to hear it," she said. "Because it won't change anything that needs to be changed. And right now there are 5 council members in a room somewhere in that building who need to walk out of it, and a pack that needs to understand what just happened and what happens next." She held his eyes. "We have work to do. We do the work." He stood with that for a moment. Then he nodded. Once. "What do you need from me?" he said. "A formal council assembly," she said. "Today. Full documentation of Vanessa's network submitted to the council record. The Ironmouth contracts terminated in writing before nightfall." She paused. "And a public acknowledgement, on the record, of the succession announcement's legal status under pack law. The council will determine what that means going forward. Not you, not me. The council." He looked at her. "You're asking me to step back." "I'm asking you to step correctly," she said, "for the first time in 2 years. It's a different thing." Another pause, longer. She watched him absorb this. The specific difficulty of it, for a man whose authority had been the load-bearing wall of his entire identity since he was old enough to understand what an alpha was. Asking Ryker Vale to step back was not a small request. It was a request to become a different kind of man than the one he had been. And that kind of becoming did not happen cleanly or quickly or without cost. But he had stepped forward in the courtyard when the southern horn sounded. He had stood beside her when it would have been easier to stand anywhere else. That was not nothing. She did not know yet what it was, but it was not nothing. "All right," he said. The council assembly convened 2 hours later. All 5 surviving members were present, shaken, drawn, carrying the specific exhaustion of people who had been in a room against their will for 36 hours and were now being asked to perform institutional function before they had eaten a proper meal. Elder Marin, the senior member remaining after Fenwick's death, sat at the head of the table with the particular gravity of someone who had lived long enough to watch a great many things fail and was doing the work of bearing witness anyway. Selene presented the documentation. Kael's Eastern commander Reza had ridden through with the full verified files before noon. 14 months, organized and cross-referenced, the kind of evidentiary record that did not leave room for interpretation. The council reviewed it in silence. Marin asked 3 questions, precise and direct. Selene answered them. The other members asked nothing, which was itself a form of answer. Ryker submitted a formal statement acknowledging that the succession announcement had not followed established PAC law review procedures and requesting a council determination of its validity. He submitted it in writing. He read it aloud. He did not offer justification or context or the elaborate self-exoneration that Selene had half expected, and its absence was the most significant thing about the document. Vanessa was located in the Eastern residential wing. She had made no attempt to leave. She sat in a chair when Davin's people came for her with the composed, self-contained stillness of a woman who had already moved through the stages of this outcome in her own mind and arrived at something on the other side of it. She submitted to the council's authority without resistance. She asked once to see Marcus, and that request was granted before anything else. She sat with the boy for 20 minutes in a room with the door open, and whatever passed between a mother and a 3-year-old in those 20 minutes was private and real, and entirely separate from the political architecture that had brought them all to this point. The boy was not at fault. Everyone in Silverfang understood this. Even the wolves who were most furious at what had been done understood that the child was a piece moved by adults, and had not chosen any of it. Marcus Drayvale would be provided for. That was not a question. The council voted before nightfall. The succession announcement was formally invalidated pending a full legal review. Ryker's authority as Alpha was suspended for a period of 60 days, during which a council-appointed governance structure would manage PAC affairs. Vanessa was to be remanded to house arrest pending a full accounting of the Treasury movements and a determination of appropriate remedy under PAC law. The Ironmouth mercenaries had indeed departed the southern approach by mid-afternoon, as Selene had calculated. When the vote was read aloud, Selene sat at the council table and looked at her hands and felt something move through her that was not triumph. Triumph was a performance, and she was finished with performances. What she felt was quieter and more structural than that. The specific settling of a thing that has been held in tension for a very long time and has finally been allowed to find its level. The work was not finished. It would not be finished for months, possibly years. The PAC needed rebuilding from the Treasury outward. The Eastern trade routes needed restructuring. The alliance questions that Vanessa's network had infected would need careful, patient untangling by someone with the institutional knowledge and the credibility to do it. There was a great deal ahead. She knew how to do a great deal ahead. She had been doing it her whole life. Kael found her at the northern wall an hour after the vote. She was standing where the wall walk gave an unobstructed view of the northern approach, the descent and the tree line below, the limestone ridge just visible in the far distance. She had been standing there for a while. She was not sure how long. The evening light was doing something complicated with the clouds over the ridge, laying gold and gray in alternating bands across the stone, and she had found herself watching it with the specific quality of attention that comes when your body finally stops running and returns to the ordinary world. He came and stood beside her without announcing himself the way he did most things, without ceremony, just present, occupying the space with the settled weight of someone who had decided to be there and did not need acknowledgement for the decision. They stood in silence for a moment. "The council vote," he said. "I heard," she said. "Davin told me." "The 60-day suspension is a start." "It's more than a start," she said. "It's a structure. Structures are how things get rebuilt." He was quiet. The evening moved across the ridge. "You could have asked for more," he said. "The council would have given it. They would have seated you as acting Luna today if you'd asked." "I didn't ask," she said. No. She looked at the ridge. Because I don't want what they would have given me today. What they give you in the aftermath of a crisis is gratitude. Gratitude is not a foundation. She paused. I've spent 9 years building on gratitude, on being indispensable, on making myself so necessary that removing me would cost more than keeping me. She felt the words as she said them, felt the accuracy of them landing somewhere specific. That's not a position. That's a hostage negotiation. Kyle turned to look at her. What I want, she said, I'll build. The same way I built everything else. Slowly, correctly, so that when it stands because of what it is, not because of what it replaced. He looked at her for a long moment. In his face she could read, and she was learning his face, had been learning it for 5 days with the involuntary speed of someone paying attention to someone who deserved attention. The particular quality of a man listening to something he recognizes. Something that maps onto his own internal architecture in a way he had not expected. Shadowclaw's Eastern Alliance structure is broken, he said. Tomas Ray's reporting compromised 3 years of relationship building. I'll spend the next 6 months rebuilding it. A pause. I could use someone who knows the Northern Territory networks, the Silverfang Council connections, someone who has spent 9 years understanding how power actually moves between packs rather than how it's supposed to move. She looked at him. That's a very indirect offer, she said. Yes, he said. What are you actually asking? He held her eyes. In the evening light, his face was stripped of everything except the essential, the tiredness of a man who had been holding a great deal together for a long time, the particular alertness of someone fully present to a conversation that mattered. I'm asking if you'll stay involved, he said. In whatever capacity makes sense, at whatever pace makes sense. He glanced down briefly, the same deliberate look he had given her in the meeting room, what felt like a different lifetime, and then back up. All 3 of you. She felt that land in her chest. She looked at the ridge. She thought about what she had carried for 11 days alone, what she had carried for 5 years before that. The loss, the long silence after, the specific labor of continuing to function when grief was eating the interior of something she had thought was permanent. She thought about what it cost to build alone, to be competent alone, to be the person in every room who kept things standing while nobody checked whether she was standing herself. She thought about a man who had held damaging information for 11 days and sent it back to her as protection. She was not going to say yes today. Today was too raw, too full of things that had just ended and things that had not yet begun. Too close to the courtyard and the documents and Ryker's face in the morning light and Fenwick's 4 sentences and all the rest of it. She was not going to make a decision about the rest of her life on a wall walk at dusk in the residue of a battle. But she did not say no. She turned to face him. Ask me again, she said, in 30 days, when the council structure is running, when I know what this pack needs and what I can give it and what I need to keep for myself. He nodded. 30 days. He said. She turned back to the ridge. Months later, when the moonfire ceremony came again, the torches were lit by hand. Selene oversaw the lighting herself. She moved through the line with a flame rod and a word for each family, the same way she had for 9 years, and if the faces watching her were different, more of them, some of them Shadowclaw-born, some of them from the outer territories who had traveled 2 days to be here, the quality of the thing was the same. It was the quality of something that mattered. She had always believed that it did. The alliance between Silverfang and Shadowclaw had been formalized in the 7th week. Not through urgency, not through crisis, but through the slow, careful architecture of people who understood that structures built correctly last longer than structures built fast. 6 council sessions, 3 weeks of territorial negotiation, the specific unglamorous labor of 2 packs deciding what they were willing to share and what they intended to keep, conducted by people on both sides who had learned, sometimes at significant cost, the difference between genuine partnership and the performance of it. Selene had led the Silverfang side, not as Luna, not yet, and perhaps not ever in the form she had worn the title before. She had been appointed as the council's chief negotiator and territorial representative, a position that was technically new, that had no ceremonial weight and no silver crest and no 9-year history embedded in it. It was exactly what she had said to Kyle on the wall walk, a position she had built, not one she had been given in the aftermath of someone else's failure. Ryker had returned to a diminished authority after his 60 days. The council had restored him with conditions that had no precedent in Silverfang's history: oversight structures, joint decision requirements on foreign policy, and territorial agreements, a formal accountability review every 4 months. He had accepted every condition without negotiation. She did not know what that had cost him. She had some idea. She had watched him in council sessions across a table, watched him navigate the new architecture of his own authority, watched him do the work of becoming a different kind of leader without the benefit of anyone telling him what that looked like or whether he was doing it correctly. It was difficult and unglamorous, and he did it anyway. She did not love him anymore. That was simply true. The way geography was true, something that existed in the world without requiring comment. She had loved him for 9 years, and the love had been real, and the loss of it had been real, and what remained was something more honest, a working understanding between two people who had survived something together and chose, without drama, to keep working. He was good at his job when he allowed himself to be. She had always known that. She had forgiven him, not in the clean, single-moment way that stories suggested. Not a declaration, not a ceremony, not a conscious decision made and completed. It had happened the way most true things happened, slowly, incrementally, in the ordinary passage of days where she was too busy building something to maintain the energy of holding a specific person responsible for the specific weight of a specific wound. One morning, she had woken up and realized the weight wasn't there anymore. That was all. It had simply gone, the way pain goes when the tissue underneath it finally finishes healing. She had forgiven herself harder. That had taken longer. The particular cruelty of being a competent person was the long aftermath of examining every decision you had made and asking whether you should have known sooner, moved sooner, refused to accept less sooner. She had done that examination thoroughly in the quiet hours of the 7th and 8th weeks when the crisis was over and there was nothing left to manage but her own interior. She had been honest about what she could have done differently and honest about what she could not have controlled. And she had sat with both truths without trying to collapse them into a single verdict about her own worth. That work, the internal work, the unglamorous forensics of understanding what you survived and why, was the hardest thing she had done in 2 years. Harder than the council assembly, harder than the courtyard, harder than riding through the dark for 4 days in a torn ceremonial gown. You could survive a betrayal on adrenaline. What came after required something else entirely. What it required, she had learned, was the willingness to stay in the room with yourself after the crisis ended. To not immediately replace one set of survival obligations with another. To let the quiet happen and not run from what it contained. The boy was born on the first morning of winter. He was loud immediately, which she took as a good sign. He had her coloring, and Ryker's jaw, and his own particular expression of determined focus that showed up in the first hour and had not left since. The expression of someone who arrived with an opinion already formed and intended to share it. She had looked at him for a long time in those first hours, this specific weight in her arms, this specific reality that she had carried through a ceremony and a rock shelf and a limestone trail and a council assembly and all the rest of it, and had felt something she did not have adequate language for, something that preceded language, that was older and more foundational than any word she had for it. She named him Fen, for the elder who had stood up. Kyle had been in the building when the boy arrived. He had waited outside without being asked to, which she appreciated, and when he came in and looked at the child with the careful, entirely present attention he gave to everything that mattered to him, she had watched his face do something she had seen only once before, on the wall walk in the evening light, when she had said, "Ask me again in 30 days. The thing underneath the control, the thing that was not performed. She had asked him 30 days after that. Her question, not his. She had decided she was done waiting for someone else to initiate the things she wanted. She had walked into his council offices in the 3rd week of the alliance negotiations and told him she wanted to have the conversation he had started on the wall, and he had looked at her for a moment with that quality of attention she had come to recognize as his version of something deep and unsaid. And then he had told her everything he had not said before, plainly and without armor, the way only people who have been through something real together can speak to each other.
It had not been simple after that. Nothing worth building was simple. But it had been honest. And honest, she had learned at considerable cost over the past year, was the only material that lasted.
On the night of the ceremony, she stood before the assembled packs as the last torch was lit. Behind her, the full ceremonial circle, Silverfang gray and Shadowclaw black, the outer territory families and the allied delegations, more wolves in this circle than had ever stood together on this ridge in her memory. Ahead of her, the northern ridge and the dark beyond it, and the cold air moving down from the limestone heights, carrying the particular smell of coming winter that she had first breathed as a 26-year-old woman arriving with a horse and a travel pack and a private decision about what the rest of her life was going to mean. She thought about that woman. She thought about her with the specific tenderness you could only develop for an earlier version of yourself after enough time had passed to see the whole shape. The competence and the loneliness and the particular courage of someone who kept building things after the ground kept giving way, who kept showing up, who carried what she carried and did not let it make her small. That woman had deserved better than she received for a long time. She had it now. Not because someone had given it to her, not because a crisis had cleared the path, not because she had outlasted the right opponents or aligned with the right allies, or survived long enough for the world to come around to recognizing what she was worth. Because she had done what she had always done, through every war and famine and betrayal and loss. She had kept building. She had kept building until the thing she was building was finally, correctly, entirely hers. Kale stood to her right with Fen against his chest, the boy's small dark head visible over his forearm, already asleep with the absolute confidence of someone who had never had a reason not to trust the arms holding him. He was not looking at the crowd. He was looking at her, steady and direct and entirely present, the way he had been looking at her since a rock shelf in the dark outside Silverfang, since a war room table, since a wall walk at dusk. She held the last torch. She touched it to the final iron stake, and the fire caught and held. 800 wolves went still in the old way, the way of the ceremony, the breath of a pack becoming, for one moment, a single body. She looked at the circle of fire around them, at the faces in the light, at the work ahead of her, visible and real in hers. She breathed, and the moonfire burned.